Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, where we talk about the fundamentals of aviation insurance. And we've spent a lot of time talking about aircraft insurance policies, at least at a basic level, and aviation commercial general liability policies. And in each of those policies, we talked about a lot of exclusions, and that a lot of those exclusions are in place because the coverage for them is better placed elsewhere in a different coverage or in a different insurance policy. And today we're going to talk about one of those exposures, and that is professional liability. Now, according to the Insurance Risk Management Institute, their definition of professional liability is a type of liability coverage designed to protect traditional professionals. They say, for example, accountants and attorneys, and quasi-professionals. They say, for example, real estate brokers and consultants, against liability incurred as a result of errors and omissions in performing their professional services, right? So these are economic and financial occurrences, not bodily injury and property damage. Bodily injury and property damage is better covered elsewhere, like your aircraft or your commercial general liability policy. So this is going to cover economic and financial exposures out of a consultant or professional's errors and omissions in performing their professional service. So why do we talk about that in aviation? In aviation, it is important to consider those services that we offer that are advice or counsel, right? It's not an actual providing a service like fuel, maintaining, repairing an aircraft or fueling an aircraft. It is not selling a product like fuel or parts. It is the advice we provide. So here are some practical examples. A lot of maintenance providers will do pre-purchase inspection. If someone you provided a pre-purchase inspection for comes back and says, hey, you missed this and this aircraft isn't worth what I paid for it, well, that's not covered under aviation commercial general liability. That is excluded. There's no other coverage unless you have a professional liability policy. So pre-purchase inspections is a big one. How about designing of an avionics panel? They said, hey, there wasn't a loss, but the way you design this, I'm not going to be able to resell it at a decent price. Aircraft brokers, aviation consultants that provide advice or counsel as part of their business, they have a professional liability exposure, and that's why a professional liability policy or an errors and omissions policy is important for most businesses to consider if they're providing advice or counsel in their professional capacity. Unlike an aircraft or aviation commercial general liability policy, these policies are written on a claims-made basis. On an aircraft or aviation CGL policy, they're written on an occurrence basis. So when the occurrence happened, the crash happened here, that's the policy that responds, even if the claim's made the next year or after the policy expires. It's when the occurrence happened, the policy is enforced, that policy responds. Well, in a professional liability or errors and omissions, the coverage only responds when the claim is made. So if the issue was this year during this policy and the claim's not made till next year, then we need to make sure we have a policy next year. We have to have a policy in force at the time the claim is made. And so if we stop doing something, stop providing a service, we actually need to continue to have what we call a runoff professional liability or a runoff errors and omissions policy for the years down the road where this exposure still exists. So it's a claims-made policy, and it's also on a shrinking cost basis with the limits, the shrinking limits provision. The defense costs are not outside of the limit of liability. As we've talked about with aircraft and aviation CGL policies, they have the limit of liability, and the defense costs are separate from that limit of liability. They do not reduce, in most policies, the limit of liability. Well, in a professional liability policy, the defense costs take away from the available limit. So as they are preparing the defense, and we had $1 million policy, each dollar they spend comes out of the limit available to pay an award. So if we spent $500,000 and the defense preparing for the trial or whatever it is, we only have $500,000 left if we had $1 million policy. So the defense costs are a shrinking limit provision, defense cost inside the limit of liability. So if you provide advice or counsel where there could be a potential economic or financial loss to someone else, and we talked about a few examples, there are more, you need a professional liability or an errors and omissions liability policy to protect your business. Well, that's all for this week. Join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes, and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aeris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit aerosinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer. These episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.